Asmat Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Parama Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Sarva Gurubhyo Namaha. So before starting any endeavor, we always have to think of our teachers, all of the teachers that have taught us different subjects, and from which we, ultimately the Supreme Lord within our heart is the one who allows us to understand anything and gives knowledge to us. And so at the beginning of any, especially at the beginning of any study, we should always remember the teachers, including the Chaitya Guru, the Lord within the heart. So we're starting a new topic today, which is a book called On Vaishnavism. It's a very comprehensive book, and it's by a person called S.M. Srinivasachari. He's a Wadagalai Sri Vaishnava. He's a scholar. He's studied also in very traditional method under many different gurus, Sri Vaishnava gurus, teachers, and he's trying to give us in this book called Vaishnavism, its philosophy, theology, and religious discipline. So he's basically telling us about the philosophy of Vaishnavism, the theological aspects on top of the philosophy. Usually we distinguish the philosophy and the theology of Vaishnavism. The philosophy is based on Vedanta. It's a type of Vedanta. Or there is, since we're talking about all different branches of Vaishnavism, there will be several flavors of Vedanta, which different Vaishnava schools follow. The theology, of course, on top of that, whether people are Sri Vaishnavas, whether people are worshippers of Sriman Narayana or Krishna or Rama, different avatars or whatever it is, right, and different forms of Vishnu. So the theological aspects will also be there, and they also differ from sect to sect. And then the religious discipline, the actual practice of the different Vaishnava groups. So this will all be covered, and what he is going to do is he's going to take it in a historical sense. He's going to start from the beginnings of the Vedas, and which are the most ancient of texts, and bring it up through the different sects Vaishnava sects that have come to be, and the different teachers and lineages, etc. So he's going to cover all those topics. So we'll have a look as we go through. We'll see. So my main purpose here is, while reading the book, to try and explain as simply as possible the jargon that the technical Sanskrit words that are used by the author. He writes very good English. He speaks very good and writes very, very lucid modern English. And he refers to some older authors who have tried to teach about Vaishnavism, not just Sri Vaishnavism, but all forms of Vaishnavism. In the introduction, he talks about that in the preface, and so we'll learn about those attempts also to present Vaishnavism in English or in other languages, but especially in English over the last 100 or so years, we've found that people have written about Vaishnavism, but it's been in perhaps a little bit archaic English, or old style English, which is a little difficult for people to understand. So that's why this book is good, because it's a recent book, and I think in the sense that we can say it's in contemporary English. I believe the first edition was 1994. So that's pretty contemporary. That's, within the last 30 years or so. So without any further ado, let's start having a look. I'll share the screen, and once again, it's a discussion. So if at any point people have questions, or if you want to continue on, if you want a fuller understanding of a particular word or topic, then just unmute and just let me know. So, okay, so this is the copy. This is this is a picture of Tirunarayana, what's called Tirunarayana, the deity of Lord Narayana in a place called Melkote. which is a sacred place in Karnataka, which is the southern state of India, on the let's say west of Tamil Nadu. But also this place is a place where Ramanuja escaped and stayed for 10 to 15 years in exile when he was being persecuted during his lifetime, which was 1017 to 1137 AD, or CE. Let's use the word CE, Common Era. Because he was being persecuted by the king of Tanjore, who was a Chola king. There's a dynasty of kings called Cholas who had their headquarters in Tanjavur, which is close to Srirangam, and that king happened to be a Shaivite, a very staunch Shaivite, and he was opposed to Vaishnavism and therefore wanted to persecute Ramanuja because Ramanuja was spreading Vaishnavism all over India and converting people from other faiths such as Jainism, Buddhism, etc., and even Shaivism to Vaishnavism. So this king, being a Shaivite, didn't like that, and therefore he persecuted Ramanuja, and Ramanuja had to flee to this place, Melkote. So this is the deity in that place. The deity is known as Tirunarayana. And there's also a small deity which was also rescued and brought to this temple from Delhi. Ramanuja actually had to go all the way to North India to Delhi, but at that time there were the Mughal invaders of India. Anybody who knows a little bit about Indian history knows that around the year 1000 there was an invasion, a Mughal invasion of India. There's been invasions of India even from the time of Alexander the Great and many people. So at the time when the Mughals came in, they were Muslims and they were iconoclasts, which means that they don't like the idea of seeing God in a form, and in fact they're against it. So any form that is worshipped by any other religion, they tend to destroy those forms if they find them, as part of their zealous spreading of their own religion. Anyway, be that as it may, the Muslims had taken the small metal deity from this temple and taken it to Delhi. So Ramanuja went there and got it back. That's a whole other story, so we don't need to get into it too much. But this is a picture of the deity, and they do very good worship there. And the deity is dressed very nicely. The tilak is very interesting on his forehead. It's a type of Vaishnava tilak. The Vaishnava markings on the forehead of the deities and also the forehead of the participants in Vaishnavism, the followers of Vaishnavism, right, is called Urdhva Pundram. And in this case, we see a typical type of Sri Vaishnava Urdhva Pundram where there's a red line in the middle which represents Lakshmi. The two white lines on the sides represent the feet of the Supreme Lord. So anyway, we could go into the discussion of the form of the Lord, but we're not going to do that. So this is just the first cover. And on the jacket of the cover, it says, this is a scholarly book. As I said, the author is not only a practicer of Sri Vaishnavism, but also a great scholar, but a traditional scholar. And therefore, this book is taking Vaishnavism from a scholastic point of view as well as a devotional point of view. So this is a scholarly book of one of the oldest living religions in India, right? Vaishnavism is definitely, we'll see, it's being traced back to the Vedas, which are the oldest scriptures known to man. Tracing the basic tenets of Vaishnavism to the hymns of the Rig Veda. The Rig Veda, I'm not going to go into what the Vedas are, but the Vedas are the most ancient scriptures in Sanskrit known to man. The earliest religious literature of the world, correct. The author has shown how an ancient cult has developed itself by successive stages into a well-formulated monotheistic system. Technically, we don't call it monotheistic, we call it panentheistic, but still, people tend to call Vaishnavism a monotheistic religion because they don't understand. They want to distinguish it from some other forms of Vedantic philosophy, which is non-dualistic or monistic, right? Or even Buddhist philosophy, which is nihilistic, which is the propagation that everything is nothing or everything is one homogeneous thing. So monotheistic is, is a general way of talking about Vaishnavism. And as we said, there are different flavors of Vedanta philosophy, which underlies the different sects of Vaishnavism, and we'll come to that as we go through. So the well-formulated monotheistic system in the hands of Ramanuja and his illustrious followers. So Ramanuja, some people don't agree on this, but Ramanuja tends to be understood as the first great founder acharya, or the first acharya or teacher of Vaishnavism in general, and specifically of a specific lineage and tradition called the Sri Vaishnava tradition. In the second part of the book, the fundamental philosophical theories of Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, Vishishtadvaita is going to be described later on as holistic Vedanta. Vedanta means the end of all knowledge. So the principles of deep knowledge or philosophical knowledge, which are holistic, or Vishishta Advaita, which are pan-organismic monism. It's a type of monism, right? A type of oneness of all things, but all things also are one in one sense, but they are different in other senses. They have their own distinction. So although things have an underlying basis in oneness, they have a distinction also, which is real, the real distinction, unlike the monistic philosophers like Shankara, who say that any differences that we see are not really real, they're actually illusion. So Ramanuja believed in what we call Parinamavad instead of Vaivartavad. The word vad means a way of speaking or philosophy. And so Parinamavad means a real transformation of spirit, or the Lord, or the Supreme Person, or God, into the world and the living beings, the souls. A real transformation, right? In other words, God created the world and God created the souls. So this is what Parinamavad means. And that those things have a real existence, a real permanent, eternal existence also. Whereas Vaivartavad means there's only an apparent difference. There's not a real difference. There's only an apparent difference. So these are two things that we're going to learn about. These are part of the philosophy of Vishishtadvaita, and also other forms of other schools of Vaishnavism, right? Other schools of Vedanta, let's say. When I say Vaishnavism, I'm referring to the theological school. When I talk about Vedanta, I'm talking about the philosophical school. So Ramanuja's Sri Vaishnavism is a philosophy of religion. It's not just a religion without a philosophy. It's not just a philosophy without a religion. It's not an armchair philosophy where people sit around and they talk about theory. It actually has a practice, and the practice is along theological lines. Okay, so anyway, so in the second part of the book, the fundamental philosophical theories of Vishishtadvaita Vedanta are presented to prove that Vaishnavism is not merely a religious cult. It's not merely a religious cult, but has a credible philosophic foundation. Right? We tend to find some religions, like we have, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, even Buddhism. They tend to start with the teachings of a particular guru or acharya or teacher, a particular teacher at a certain time, his philosophical speculations, and they evolve like that. So whereas Vaishnavism has a very broad basis in the Vedas, in the Vedanta or the Upanishads, the philosophy of the Upanishads. So in the third part of the book, so we have different parts of the book. Third part of the book, the distinctive theological doctrines of Vaishnavism, which are on top of the philosophy, right, are discussed thoroughly on the basis of original sources. Now, unlike, there are many other books, that deal with the subject of Indian philosophy, but they don't also deal with the theology, and they don't also deal with the practice. This one, he's trying to deal with all these things together, because we can't just look at Vaishnavism as a religion. we have to also see it as a philosophy. We have to understand all of its aspects. So from original sources is also important. For instance, if you read some other very standard texts about Indian philosophy, like History of Indian Philosophy by Das Gupta, which is very famous. He's a Bengali scholar, and he's written a wonderful book in, I think, 8 volumes, right, about all the different schools of thought and philosophy which have come up over the years in India, including Buddhism, including all of the what we call Saddarshanas, and even beyond that, the six schools that follow Vedanta or follow the Vedas, and the others which are the Astika, what are called Astika or followers of the Vedas, and then what are Nastika, which don't follow the Vedas, like Charvaka, the Indian materialism or Indian atheism, Buddhism, because remember, Buddhism, although it's not practiced that much in India, it was the source of Buddhism was in India. Buddha was from India, we could say India, Nepal area, and Jainism also. Also, we have the Jain religion coming up in India. So, okay, so when you read Das Gupta, however, he very clearly says in the beginning of his book, he says, I am only working from the Sanskrit sources, right? So when he gives an explanation of Vaishnavism, he cannot, well, although he's Bengali, so probably he can understand about Bengali Vaishnavism from Bengali sources. Otherwise, he's only understanding from Sanskrit sources. So here we have the advantage of S.M.S. Chari, who's not only well-versed in Sanskrit, but also in other languages. So he'll be able to understand from original sources that are not Sanskrit also some things about the different schools of Vedanta and Vaishnavism. So among the basic doctrines covered are Vishnu as the supreme deity, right, which is a tenet of all forms of Vaishnavism in one way or other, right? So either we say Rama is the supreme deity, or Krishna is the supreme deity, or Vishnu is the supreme deity. All of that basically philosophically is the same, theologically a little bit different. So Vishnu is inseparably related from the goddess Shri, right? Goddess Shri, or in Krishna terms or Rama terms, Radha or Rukmini or Sita, right? His consorts. Vishnu and his attributes. What are his different attributes? Vishnu and his incarnations. Vishnu as the supreme goal of life. So we're going to get into what is the goal of life, and property. Property meaning surrender or sharanagati, or approaching and surrendering ourselves to the Supreme Lord, and which is considered in the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya to be, it's considered by all Vaishnavas to be important, but considered especially important and essential and a separate path also to the Lord and to liberation by the Sri Vaishnavas. So the religious discipline and ethical values, which constitute an important feature of Vaishnavism, are treated in the 4th part of the book. So the 4th part will be more about practical practice, applying the doctrines in everyday life and how different Vaishnavas, do that. So this volume makes available for the first time in English a comprehensive account of Vaishnavism. So this is a holistic, it's a very comprehensive view, and therefore, and it's also in modern English. So, and it was just printed a few years ago, so it's very, very applicable for us today. Students of comparative religion will find the book a valuable source of authentic information. Right. So that also has to be said, that there are some other books out there who were written by Indologists, Western Indologists, who have their speculations about this and that and the other, but not being actual practitioners of Vaishnavism, and not being scholars perhaps in the particular regional languages like Tamil or whatever. They can't go deeply into the subject matter as this person has. So I highly recommend this book, and please do get a hold of it. If you need to download it, it's freely available on the internet, and people can send an email to me if they can't find it. I can show them they can download it for free, and they can read the whole book. Otherwise, you can simply, watch the videos. Okay. So Vaishnavism, it's philosophy, theology, and religious discipline by S.M.S. Srinivasacharya. The word Srinivasa, of course, The word Srinivasa is a normal name, which means the abode of Lakshmi. Srinivasa means the abode of Lakshmi. It refers to a name of Lord Sriman Narayana or Vishnu, and specifically Srinivasa normally is intended as a name of Lord Venkateshwara, the deity otherwise known as Tirupati Balaji, who has a temple on top of the seven hills, the seven divine hills of Tirupati in Andhra Pradesh in South India. Of course, his last name Chari, right? Srinivas Achari. It's actually, you can put it together and make it one word. Srinivas Achari is just a shortened and Tamilized or South Indianized form of Srinivas Acharya. The word Acharya becomes Chari in Tamil. So Acharya means teacher. So it shows that he's a Brahmin, Sri Vaishnava, and that he comes in a lineage of different teachers. He himself is a teacher. But you may find people today who have this last name who are not teachers, just as you find in other parts of India, people who are called Trivedis, Drivedis, Chaturvedis, but they don't know the Vedas, although their surname, says that they should know the Vedas. Okay, so these are just surnames, but they tend to indicate that he's a Brahmin. Okay, so it was first published in 1994. I have an original edition. This scan is of a reprint in 2000, so it's a very popular book also. I recommend this bookseller also and publisher, Motilal Banarsi Das, right, in Bungalow Road in Delhi. Right, they're a great source for Indological books like that. So he dedicates it to his Acharya Sri Gosti Purnam Soumya Narayana Acharya Swami, who illustrated the ideal Sri Vaishnava life, I guess, with profound respect and gratitude. So he dedicates it to his Acharya. Okay, so let's have a look at the forward here. So as early as 1943, the late Professor P.N. Srinivasachari, right, another person called Srinivasacharya, but distinguished by his initials, he was a great scholar who was a pioneer in presenting a systematic and scholarly account of the essentials of Vishishtadvaita, was of the view when he wrote his Philosophy of Vishishtadvaita, also available. This is my copy of that book, right? You'll find that the English in this is a little more archaic because it was written or published in 1943. So, but this is also a very good book to read. Philosophy of the Essentials of what's it called? The Philosophy of Vishishtadvaita by P.N. Srinivasachari, right? A great scholar, and published through the Adyar Library. The Adyar Library is in Madras, in a section of Madras, South Madras, called Adyar, right? The whole neighborhood is called Adyar, and it's a huge campus of the what was called the Theosophical Society in the 19th century. And up until today, even, right? This is a place where different scholars, like different Western theologians and Indian theologians, got together, and people really were interested in Indian philosophy. They used to go to the Theosophical Society. Worth a visit if you ever go to Chennai or Madras. Okay, so this was published, and there are many books published by the Adyar Library in Adyar, or the Theosophical Society, right? The Adyar Library is a little different than the Theosophical Society, but the Theosophical Society is there. He says when he wrote in that book that, quote, in contemporary Indian philosophy, Vedanta is overweighted on the side of Advaita. And this is what you'll find mostly. If you do a Google search, if you look on the internet, if you go to any bookshop and you ask about Hinduism, or if you ask about the philosophy of Hinduism in general, or Vaishnavism in particular, you will find most of the books that you find, especially in English, will be heavily weighted towards the school of Advaita, which was propounded by Adi Shankaracharya in the 8th century. Approximately here or there, we could, the exact date of Shankara is not fixed as much as the date of Ramanuja. Ramanuja's date is 1017 to 1137 CE. Shankara is probably somewhere in the 700s, somewhere in the 8th century. But people argue about that. And he propounded this Advaita philosophy. Advaita means the word dwa in Sanskrit means two. So adwa means not two, that which is not two. So his philosophy was one, or monism, or non-dualism. It can be said not two, or it can be said one, right? That everything is one homogeneous spiritual entity that has no real distinction to it, has no real attributes. It is attributeless or nirguna, without qualities, without distinctive qualities, and therefore this is called Brahman, or the impersonal absolute, and everything, absolutely everything, belongs to that, is one with that, and there is no distinction. The only reason that we see distinctions is because of some illusion, or some. He goes through Shankara goes through a complex series of machinations, explaining to people how what they see in front of them cannot be actually real. So in that sense, it's very similar to some forms of Buddhism, where they talk about reality not existing at all. Shankara doesn't say that reality doesn't exist at all. He just says reality is homogeneous oneness. Okay, so when we go and we look for books on Hinduism, then we see the scholars in the West, outside of India, everybody thinks Hinduism is basically Advaita Vedanta. It's non-dualism. Everybody thinks that Shankara is the greatest philosopher, and what he said is the whole truth and nothing but the truth. However, we do see other philosophers coming along, like Ramanuja, Nimbarka, Madhva, Vallabha, Chaitanya, other persons coming along and giving their idea of to speak more to the truth of reality than the way Shankara did. Shankara takes one aspect of reality, which is the oneness of all things in one sense, and he expands that and projects that on everything. Whereas these other philosophers come along and say, yes, there's some underlying oneness, but also there is some difference. So you're going to find that amongst the Vaishnava schools, there are different philosophers who explain the differences. They emphasize the difference that we actually see and we actually experience in this material world over the total absolute oneness of Shankara. But when we go and we look in the literature, most of the books and most of the scholars are going to be interested in the oneness. Okay, so he pointed this out. P.N. Srinivasa Pachari, he pointed this out in his book. And that's why he wrote his book, because he felt like, I need to show the other side of the coin, that there are, in fact, Hinduism is all mostly based on other philosophies, not Shankara's philosophy. And in fact, Shankara's philosophy is pretty much by itself is just an armchair philosophy. It's impossible to practice, right? Because we can't practice. If we actually believe that everything is one homogeneous thing, then there's no practice. There is no practice, there is no knowledge, because there is only one thing, and that is Brahman. So anyway, continuing on. And he says also that the balance will be restored only when the other systems of Vedanta, notably that of Ramanuja, and others, like I said, Madhva, Vallabha, these other acharyas, these other teachers, are widely known and appreciated in the West as well as in the East. Because in the East, in India, when he says the East, he means in India. In India, they've always known about Ramanuja, Madhva, Vallabha, Nimbarka, Chaitanya. They've known about these great saints. They've known about these great philosophers and their philosophies for millennia. But but in the West, some people don't know that there's any other philosophy coming out of India but Shankara, because Shankara was, all pervasive in his philosophy at a certain point. But they don't realize that there are other great schools of philosophy. Okay, especially Ramanuja's, because if you go to India today, and if you ask about Vedanta, you're either going to there's three main flavors that you're going to encounter. The first one is, of course, Advaita Vedanta of Shankara. The second biggest one is the, let's say, or most widely understood or preached one is the system of Vishishtadvaita of Ramanuja. And the third is the Dvaita Vedanta of Madhva. So these are the three main schools. like that. And even we can say, there are two main schools, basically Shankara and Ramanuja, because Madhva is far less than both of those. But and then there are other much smaller schools like the Shuddha Dvaita of Vallabha, the Dvaita Dvaita of Nimbarka, the Chintabheda Beda Tattva of Chaitanya, etc. So there are these different ones. So we're going to learn all about all of these. So maybe we're not going to learn all about all of these, but we'll touch upon each of these ideas, these systems, these philosophical systems. They're very much similar. They're all very much similar. Shankara and Madhva being the two outliers, which are the extreme cases. Shankara being the extreme monism, Madhva being the extreme dualism, right? So okay, so the rest of everybody's sort of in the middle, and give different explanations of monism and dualism, and how they're mixed. Okay, so he believes that there should be a balance, and everybody and the Western scholars, the West should also come to appreciate the balancing of the different philosophies of the different acharyas, and therefore that's why he wrote his book. And this is also what Srinivasacharya here, our Srinivasacharya, our SM Srinivasacharya, is trying to propound. So he maintained that for the purpose of a comparative study of Vedanta as a whole, Vishishtadvaita must come, quote, to its own in the world of modern Vedantic thought as a Siddhanta as well as a synthesis. Okay, what is a Siddhanta? So there in philosophical discussion, normally the way that philosophy is discussed is somebody puts forward a question. Somebody asks a question. Normally a student will ask a question or if there are two teachers discussing, one teacher will ask the question to the other teacher. And then the first answer will be an incomplete answer, and that is called the Purva Paksha. Purva Paksha means the first half. So it sort of means the initial understanding. So there'll be initial understanding, which gives us some light on the subject of the answer to the philosophical question. And then there'll be discussion. And there are points and counterpoints, etc. And when we get finally to the conclusion, what is the conclusion? That is called the Siddhanta. So the word Siddhanta here means conclusion. Philosophical conclusion is a Siddhanta, right? And how does it break down in Sanskrit? Okay, so the word anta, just like in Vedanta, the Veda means knowledge, anta means the end. So the end of all knowledge is what Vedanta means. So similarly, Siddhanta, Siddha means perfection. Siddha means perfection, and anta means end. So the end, the perfect answer. The perfect answer. So there's a question, a philosophical question. Then there's different people who are giving different answers. There's an old analogy about this, right? So that there's a bunch of blind men, and they're trying to understand what an elephant looks like. So the first blind man, he comes up and he feels the elephant's leg, and he says, "This is the elephant is like a tree. It's like a tree. A tree has a trunk, and the elephant's like a tree." Right. So he's trying to describe this to everybody. Elephant's like a tree. He's blind, so he can't see the elephant. So he just says, "Oh, I'm feeling the leg. Elephant's like a tree." Now another person comes up to the tail, and he feels the tail and says, "No, an elephant's like a snake. Elephant's like a snake or a rope." Another person comes up and he feels the tusk. Another person feels the ear, like this. So they're all getting part of the truth of what an elephant is. Yes, an elephant has got legs like a tree. Yes, elephant has a tail like a snake. Okay, but that's not an elephant. If I tell you an elephant is a snake or an elephant is a tree, that's only half truth. And half truth, sometimes we say, half truth is worse than a lie, right? Because if you said to me, describe an elephant, and I said, "Oh, it's like a tree," that would be a lie. An elephant is nothing like a tree, but its legs are like the trunk of a tree. Its tail is like a snake, etc., etc. So when we go to court, we always say we have to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So the idea of these philosophers is to tell the whole truth about reality, not just to tell us that the elephant is like a tree trunk or like a snake, right? But to tell us the whole of reality. And so therefore, this is what we call the Siddhanta. The Purva Paksha argument about what an elephant is is it's a snake. Another Purvapaksha is it's like a tree trunk, right? But the Siddhanta is when we actually open our eyes, if we're blindfolded or something and we're touching the elephant, if we actually open our eyes and we get to see what an elephant is, we see how an elephant walks, we see how an elephant eats, we see everything about the elephant, its behavior, its lifestyle, its everything. Then we get to really understand the elephant, right? And without that, we don't get what's called the Siddhanta. That is the Siddhanta, and that is the purpose of, again, another purpose of this book, or the purpose of P.N. Srinivasacharya's book, right, is to give, in the modern world of Vedantic thought, to give a full scope of what Vedanta is about, what the ancient knowledge of India is about, as well as a synthesis. So not only is the Siddhanta the final verdict, but it also has to synthesize all the other verdicts, right? So in that final verdict of what an elephant is, we also include the fact that its legs are like tree trunks and its tail is like a snake, right? So this is what he's trying to say, and he's quoting from the other previous guy. He claimed that his own work was a humble attempt at presenting the central features of the philosophy of Vishishtadvaita as an introduction to its detailed study. So even though this book by P.N. Srinivasacharya that he's describing, and he's being very humble here when he describes it, even though this book is over 600 pages long, right? He's the author of that book, says this is just a humble attempt to give you a little bit of an idea of what Ramanuja's philosophy is, well, Vishishtadvaita. Yeah? And he just claims that's an introduction. That's 600 pages, that's an introduction, right? So when he pleaded that Vishishtadvaita must be given due importance for the purpose of maintaining the balance among the various systems of Vedanta, he was exhorting the scholars in general, and those belonging to the Vaishnava tradition in particular, to expound and highlight in a systematic way the philosophical theism of Vishishtadvaita, not only for the purpose of maintaining a balance among the systems of Vedanta, right, but also for understanding the Indian culture and its synthetic genius, right? So anyway, he's praising P.N. Srinivasacharya for his previous work on the subject. This also shows the humility of the particular author that we have here. He is a great scholar in his own, and he doesn't need to praise the people who have come before him, but he feels like he has to praise his acharya, he has to praise his guru, his teacher. He has to also praise the authors that have come before him who have attempted the similar thing, and not to say I'm writing this book because everybody who came before me was wrong, or everybody that came before me was incomplete. He, in fact, is praising the guys that came before him, the scholars that have come before him, the great acharyas that have come before him, for what they have done. And he is saying, I'm simply wanting to continue this exposition. So for nearly 5 decades, right? So basically this work was probably the best book that you could read from 1943 up until 1995. So Srinivasacharya, our present author, felt, can I expound on this? Can I go further than what P.N. Srinivasacharya has done? For nearly 5 decades, his exhortation has remained unheeded. Right. So in other words, what he's saying is, although such a good book was written, people didn't really read it. It didn't really become important and famous, and it didn't do what the author wanted it to do. So therefore, I'm going to try and continue the previous author's work to spread this understanding of holistic Vaishnavism to people who really know only the monistic school of Shankara. So for nearly 5 decades, his exhortation has remained unheeded, largely unheeded, let's say. I am happy that closely following the recent publications of Fundamentals of Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, which is a book that he published prior to this, I recommend all of SMS Chari's or SM Srinivasacharya's books. The Fundamentals of Vishishtadvaita is probably a little bit more technical and difficult to understand. It's also a summary study of one of Vedanta Deshica's more terse philosophical works. That's right. A work which has been highly commended by scholars. Dr. S.M.S. Chari, right? Okay, so this is a foreword which is written by another scholar, not the actual author. Dr. S.M.S. Chari has come forward with this scholarly work on the philosophical theology and religious discipline of Vaishnavism as a supplement to it, right? So basically what he's saying is Fundamentals of Vishishtadvaita Vedanta is already published by S.M.S. Chari. Go read that. But if you really want a fuller understanding of the whole topic of religious discipline of Vaishnavism and the theology and philosophy, you need to read this book. So an attempt has been made in SMS. Dr. Chari is justified in his claim that for the first time, an attempt has been made to present in English in a single volume, remember that, a comprehensive account of the philosophy, theology, and religious discipline of Vaishnavism. So what he's saying is it's comprehensive, this book, even more than the previous book by P.N. Srinivasacharya or by all the other books that I mentioned, like by Dasgupta or other persons. According to, I am happy to say he succeeded in his attempt, right? He has, according to the person who's written this forward, succeeded in that attempt. According to the Indian tradition, which insists on unity of theory and practice, right? That you should practice what you preach. If you preach a particular philosophy, you should follow that in practice in daily life. Philosophy and religion are distinguishable, but not separable. Do you understand? So in India, whereas in the West, we say philosophy and religion can be completely separated. Somebody can have some certain philosophy, but they have a different religion too, right? Right. So, but in India, philosophy and religion are inseparable, but they are distinct subjects. So philosophy, which is darshan, the word darshan in Sanskrit means sight, to see, right? Comes from the verbal root drish, which means to see. So darshan means that which is seen, how we see things, how we see the material world, right? A darshan. So sometimes people will refer to a philosophical or a philosophical school or a theological religion as a darshan, specifically a philosophical school, as a darshan. That's why we have the six main darshans, the six main philosophical schools that follow the Vedas are called the Sad Darshanas. Sad means six in Sanskrit. Darshana means a way of looking at the world. 6 ways of looking at the world. So darshan means a way of looking at the world, a philosophical school. Philosophy, which is a darshan, is complementary to religion, which is a mata. Mata. These are technical differences between the word mata and darshan. Okay, so darshan means a philosophical understanding, a philosophical school. Mata means a sampradaya, a particular sect, and the way that sect actually practices, right? So, for instance, we have in the Advaita darshan of Shankara, the non-dualistic school of Shankara, we have many different schools. So of religion. So you have got different mats, and this mata here means what we think, different thoughts. So we have different teachers coming from Shankara who taught different modes of expressing that philosophy of Shankara. So everybody accepts the philosophy of Shankara, but amongst the followers of Shankara, there are slight differences in the deity that they worship, or the way that they worship, or the headquarters of their lineage, or their particular emphasis on a particular statement in the Vedas, etc. So while philosophy, without being merely speculative, right, should lead to practice, religion, which calls for faith, should have a philosophical basis. Okay, so Bhaktivedanta Swami of ISKCON has described this like that philosophy without religion is like a lame person, a lame person. The person can't walk, right? He can see, he's got philosophy, he can't walk. And religion without philosophy is like a blind person. So the person is doing many things like that, but he doesn't have the philosophical basis for what he's doing. He also described religion without philosophy as simply sentiment and philosophy, because it involves the emotions and the emotional life of the person without any philosophical basis. So it's simply mere sentiment. Philosophy without religion. I mean, religion without philosophy, and philosophy without religion is mere mental speculation without any actual practice, right? So we can sit. This is what we call armchair philosophers in the West. Okay. So anyway, in other words, what we require is philosophy-based religion, right? We need a religion which has actually got a philosophical basis, a strong philosophical basis. Not that we have a religion, we follow a religion, but it really doesn't make sense philosophically. Yeah. So we have a theology, but that theology is not based on proper philosophical axioms or basic statements. So, and we also need a religious biased philosophy. We also need a philosophy which takes into account our whole being, our whole lifestyle, our whole life, our whole culture, and our whole being, and our whole emotional, and not just the mental. Doesn't satisfy us mentally, but also should satisfy us completely. Should satisfy the way we live, the way we live our lives. You know, it should satisfy that. It should have aspects of that. Both things need to be there together. So such a combination, Dr. Chari observes, is found in Vaishnavism, which is Vedic in origin, and which has developed distinctive theological doctrines which are founded on sound philosophical theories enunciated in the Upanishads, right, which are the ancient philosophical part of the Vedas, which are the most ancient scriptures known to man. So with a view to distinguish the philosophical aspect from the religious in Vaishnavism, the former is referred to as Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, and the latter is called Vaishnavism, right? Now, this is very important to understand. If I simply talk about Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, you don't know whether I'm a worshiper of Shiva or a worshiper of Vishnu. Because in fact, there is a commentary on the Vedanta Sutras. The Vedanta Sutras are aphorisms written by Badarayana, otherwise known as Vedavyasa, a great rishi who compiled the Vedas, and also is the traditional author of the Puranas, etc., Mahabharata, and Vedavyasa in his Brahma Sutras, or Badarayana is usually given that name when he's talked about as the author of the Vedanta Sutras. A sutra is a thread or a very small aphorism, which has a lot of meaning to it, but it's very cryptic in itself and needs explanation. It needs a purport. It needs to be explained. It has the seed of a great explanation within it, but it has not been explained. Right. So these Vedanta Sutras are commented by the different philosophers like Ramanuja and Shankara and Madhva and Vallabha, etc. So when we're referring to the philosophy part, right? When we're referring to philosophy, we're talking about, in terms of Sri Vaishnavism, we're talking about Vishishtadvaita Vedanta. Now, when we talk about Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, we can talk about it as being Shaiva Vishishtadvaita, or we can talk about it as Vaishnava Vishishtadvaita. There was a person called Srikara who came after Ramanuja, who wrote a commentary like Ramanuja's on Vedanta. But instead of understanding, as even Shankara admits in the beginning of Shankara's Bhagavad Gita commentary, he says Narayana Pravyaktat, Narayana is the supreme. So even Shankara understood that. Sometimes people get this misunderstanding that Shankara is somehow a Shaivite. He's not a Shaivite. Shaivism is different from Advaita. So people who follow Shankara, they may worship many aspects of Brahman as they understand it. But sometimes people think that Advaitins are Shaivites. They're not. There are Advaitins who worship Vishnu. There are Advaitins who worship Devi. There are Advaitins who worship different. This is theological. The particular deity that they worship and the way they worship is theological. Their philosophy, underlying philosophy, is Advaita, non-dualism. Now, therefore, we have the same thing in Vishishtadvaita. We have people who are Vishishtadvaita Shaivites and people who are Vishishtadvaita Vaishnavas. So that may be a little bit surprising to some people. But this person, Shrikar, wrote a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, very much like the philosophical principles are very much like Ramanuja's. In fact, he seems to have copied Ramanuja in many places. But he says that my theological deity, my understanding of God is Shiva, not Vishnu. So that is called Shaiva Vishishtadvaita and Vaishnava. However, unlike the Vaishnava Vishishtadvaita, which has become a great school with many adherents, the Shaiva Vishishtadvaita is practically extinct today, because we can say nobody follows that, it became very much influenced by the Advaita Vedanta. Okay, so, but when we're talking about philosophy, we talk about Vishishtadvaita. When we talk about religion or theology, we talk about Vaishnavism, or specifically to go with Vishishtadvaita, we talk about Sri Vaishnavism or Ramanuja Vaishnavism. But the two aspects are actually two sides of a coin. They're inseparable, right? So just like we have heads and tails on a coin, right? We have one side, we have the obverse and the reverse of the coin. We have these two sides to a coin. Similarly, philosophy and religion are just two sides of the same coin in India. That's what they think. They can't be separated, but they are two different aspects. Right. So Dr. Chari substantiates the claim that Vaishnavism is both philosophy and religion with reference to its Upanishadic base. So he's mentioned this before, right? So he's going to say in the beginning of the book, he's going to explain how Vaishnavism can be seen from the Upanishads. By the way, if anybody's interested, Adyar, the Adyar Library publishers have also published Vaishnava Upanishads, which you can read. You can also read in English translation with a commentary by Upanishad Brahma Yogan. So the Vedanta Sutras explains the teachings of the Upanishads, which I just mentioned, that the Upanishads are giving philosophical concepts all over the place and not in any particular order. The book that we're studying now goes in a particular order, in a logical and sequential order, bit by bit, and brings us to a conclusion. The Upanishads have different conclusions, which are stated in different places and not in any particular order. So in order to order them together under different subjects, order the different parts of the Upanishad, different principles that are spoken about in different Upanishads together under different subject matters and make it a systematic system, right? Badarayana has made the Vedanta Sutras and put them in different categories, like in different subjects, right? All the quotes. So that's why the Vedanta Sutra is important, because it's systematic, similar to this book also, systematic. So which is a superficial, okay, the Vedanta Sutras explain the teachings of the Upanishads, which on a superficial reading, if we superficially read the Upanishads, they appear to be incoherent because they jump all over the place with different understandings. By rearranging them within a structural framework of reasoning, and he puts in brackets here the word tarka. Tarka means reasoning. Okay, here's a couple of words that you'll hear. Nyaya means logic. Tarka means reasoning. Anumana means inference. Okay, so these are logical inference. So all of these are slightly different words for the same thing. We have to use our reasoning also. Reason is not thrown out the window. It's not just a dogma here. We're not teaching you a dogma. We're not explaining to you, when we explain Vaishnavism and Vishishtadvaita Vedanta or any other forms of Vedanta, even Shankara's Vedanta is not a dogma. It's rational. It's based on logic, and all of these schools are based on logic, taking aspects of the scriptures, the Vedas, the Upanishads, and other scriptures, and showing them to how they logically lead to a particular conclusion, right? So there has to be logic also involved in this. These are what we're going to get into that. There'll be a discussion of what is the pramanas, I'm sure. Pramanas means method or epistemological method of understanding what is true knowledge. Just like today we have fake news. So how do you know what is fake news and how do you know what is real news? Okay, that's what a pramana is for. So the pramanas understood by Vaishnavas are normally three. They are pratyaksha, anumana, and shabda. So pratyaksha means sense perception. Seeing is believing. I see some things and therefore I believe them, right? sometimes when we see something, though it's an illusion or there's a mistake due to sense perception being faulty, and therefore we have to use logical inference to infer something, right, to be true, right? So the example of this is smoke and fire, right? I see smoke and I think there's fire, right? So when I see smoke, I know there's fire. I don't actually see the fire, right? So somebody may say, well, I don't see any fire, but I said, I see smoke, therefore there's fire. So that's logical inference. I didn't have to see the fire. I understood there was fire because there was smoke. And then authoritative statement or shabda. So pratyakshya, anumana, and shabda. So pratyakshya, sense perception, anumana, logical inference, and shabda, which means authority. There is authority. And for Vedantins, obviously, the Upanishads, the Vedanta, the end part of the Vedas, the philosophical part of the Vedas, is the greatest authority for all Vedantins, like that. And you can argue, there are other schools which are against the Vedas, and you can argue against the Vedas, but for right now, let's leave that, and let's not get into arguments about why the Vedas are authoritative. They are accepted by all these schools of Vedanta as being swata pramana, or self-proved proof. We don't need to prove them any. We just simply need to quote them, and we have to accept the statements of the Vedas. So that sounds a little dogmatic, but we can go into more deeply the arguments why that's important or why that's true. But for now, we just try to understand the point here that reasoning. The point being made here is that reasoning or logical reasoning is not thrown away when we study philosophy. In fact, in the study of philosophy, we should always try to think of why something is rational, why something is logical, why a thing is inferred by a particular statement in the scripture or a particular set of reasoning, right? It should always be logical, right? So the main topics, of course, there are some subject matters which we have absolutely no, are completely beyond us, the spiritual world or God or something that may be completely beyond us to understand fully. And therefore, at a certain point, even logic gives out, right? Sense perception gives out at a certain point, and logic also gives out. And we simply have to accept the authority of the Vedas. That's okay. But mostly, when we're talking about philosophical subjects, things will be logical and things will be sequential. So the main topics that constitute the subject matter of the Upanishads can be grouped in different ways. According to one method, which they can be brought about under three groups, right? So, okay, so what Badarayana did in the Vedanta Sutras is he wrote these sutras in what we call adhikaranas, or subject matters, sequential subject matters, to explain the whole system. And he also wrote 4 chapters. So within the chapters, there are different, what we call adhikaranas. The adhikaranas are different subjects. So as I said before, there's a question, a philosophical question. Then there's a purva paksha, right? Which is the initial response, which will be inadequate, like understanding that an elephant is a tree trunk or a snake. And then there'll be the siddhanta, which is the understanding of the whole of the elephant, the whole of the answer. So, okay, so that is an adhikarana. So the Vedanta Sutras are made up of all these subjects, all these questions with answers, like that. Then the questions themselves are grouped into subjects. So here we have the subjects that those questions are grouped into: tattva, hita, and purushartha. Tattva means principles. What is reality? What is reality? Tattva, what is the principle? What do we see around us? What is reality? What is the reality that we experience? Purushartha, I'll get to hita in a minute. Purushartha is the goal. What is the goal? Once we understand the reality is that we are here, we are a spiritual being within a material body. We are covered by some form of ignorance or illusion. And we want to get free from that illusion. We want to get free from, we seek bliss, we seek happiness. So how do we have eternal happiness? How do we get out from a cycle of birth and death, etc., etc.? How do we reach liberation, what is called liberation from all of these problems that we have in this material world? That is the goal. And there are different goals, of course. Purushartha, the word Purushartha means a goal or an aspiration, right? And Purusha means of man, the goals of man, because man is a philosophical animal. Other animals are only working on instinct, basically. Man is the one who's thinking philosophically. He has the ability to think philosophically. Okay, so Purushartha is the goals of man. The goals of man are normally said in Sanskrit to be four: Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Right? Dharma means religiosity. Artha means economic development. In that sense, it means economic development or making, making our livelihood, right? And Dharma, Artha, Kama. Kama means, fulfillment of desires that we have, whatever desires they are, whether they be sensual desires or material desires or even spiritual desires. And moksha is ultimately leaving all of these three lower goals behind and seeking a better life in the hereafter, after death, or seeking liberation from the cycle of birth and death. So those are purusharthas. They're the goals, right? So we have tattva. First of all, we have to understand reality. What is real? What is beyond all the fake understandings, the misunderstandings of the philosophies? We have to understand what's real. Then once we understand what's real, we have a goal. We have the goal of liberation. Hita is how to get from understanding what is real to the goal. Now that we know what the goal is, now that we understand our position, how do we get from here to there? That is hita. That is the process. That is the means, or the upaya. There's also another name for it in Sanskrit. So tattva, hita, purushartha. These are the three basic headings of philosophy, right? According to Vedanta. According to Vedanta, even Shankara, even any philosophy of Vedanta, right? So, okay. So the Vedanta Sutras are also, they've got these little subject matter sections called adhikaranas, right? Where there are questions and answers leading to a siddhanta, leading to a perfect understanding of a particular aspect. And then we have the whole books, the whole book made of 4 chapters, and the 4 chapters are divided up between these tattva, hita, and purushartha. How are they divided up? The first chapter and the second chapter are tattva. The first chapter tells us what is spiritual, what is reality, right? The second chapter tells us what is not reality, what is not spiritual. Because in order to understand fully what is, we have to also understand what is not, right? So there's a statement in the Vedas, neti neti. There's one philosopher, he says, if you really want to know the truth, go around finding all the lies, right? Go around and say, it's not that, it's not that, it's not that, it's not that. This is the way Buddha did it. Buddha said, Buddha tried austerity. He tried penance like that. It didn't work for him. He tried lavish lifestyle like that. It didn't work for him. So he says, I took a middle path because this didn't work for me, that didn't work for me, right? So what we're saying here is that we can go around and we can look at all these different philosophies and we can say, no, that doesn't ring true to me. There's a description, some philosopher says that he believes this or he believes that or whatever. The Jains believe that the soul is the size of the human being, of the whole body. Why does that not make sense? What does that mean? An ant has a very small soul and an elephant has a huge soul? This doesn't make rational sense. There's so many arguments against it. Okay, so we can go around and we can go neti, neti. What does neti mean? Na iti. Na iti in Sanskrit. Na means not, right? And iti means thus. So that which is not is neti. So if I go around and I say, I read about that philosophy. No, that's not. That to me fails. That's not the whole truth. There's a little bit of truth there, but there's not the whole truth. There's not the siddhanta. That's a purvapaksha. That's an argument. It has some validity, right? Right? The elephant, is sort of like a tree trunk, sort of like a snake, but he's not really a tree trunk or a snake. I want to see the whole big picture. So if you want to see the whole big picture, you have to know also what the elephant is, but also what the elephant is not, right? Because some people may think that they know what reality is, and then somebody will come along and say, well, what about this? You can also add this to your philosophy. But that thing that they're telling them is completely against the basis of their philosophy, but they think it somehow can be included within it, right? Just an example of this is that there's a group of persons who believe that within Vaishnavism and even amongst other religions, we believe that we go to the abode of the Lord, we go to the heaven, the Vaikuntha, like that. And although it says in the scripture that one never returns from there, there are people who believe that you can return from there. Whereas in fact, in the Vedanta Sutra, the very last sutra is no return, no return. It explains with quotations from the Upanishads and many, many proofs how there cannot be a return from perfection. When one perfects himself, when one attains moksha, there cannot be any return to imperfection, the state that we're in now. So there are some people though who think, yeah, why not? Why can't we return to imperfection, right? Once I tell you something, once I explain something to you, you're never going to not know it. You can't unknow it. You cannot unknow a truth. If you actually understand a truth, you cannot unknow it like that, unless obviously you have an accident and you get brain damage or something. But otherwise, under normal circumstances, if you actually realize the truth, you're not going to unknow it, right? I can't unsee that. I can't unknow that. People say this all the time, right? So that's our experience. Our experience is once we come to a realization, if that's a true realization, right, then that cannot be undone. Now, of course, realizations may not be perfect. And if a realization is imperfect, it can be modified. But that's another thing. But anyway, the point here is to not only know what is truth by knowing the truth or being told the truth or being or inferring the truth or logically understanding the truth, but also to know what is not truth. This is described in Isopanishad. There's a statement, Vidyam cha yastadvedo vayagum saha, is a quote from Isopanishad. From the Isopanishad, which is the pressed jewel of Upanishads. It's the greatest Upanishad because it's the number one in the list of 108 Upanishads given in the I think it's in there's another, the 108th Upanishad gives a list of all the Upanishads. I forget the name of it. But anyway, so the first Upanishad is Isopanishad. It even comes in the Samhita section of the Yajurveda, the Sutra Yajurveda. It's the 40th chapter of the Sutra Yajurveda, the last chapter. In that, there's a sloka. Therefore, it's called Samhita Upanishad sometimes because it's the only one that comes in the Samhita section. The others are all separate. And it's very, very important. And he says, Vidyam cha vidyam. Those of you who know beginning Sanskrit, vidyam means knowledge. Avidyam means ignorance. If I put cha in the middle, what does it mean? It means knowledge and ignorance. One who knows the truth and also knows what is not truth. He knows. And that is stated in the Upanishad. So that is the principle that these first two chapters of Vedanta Sutra are based on. Tattva. Tattva means knowing the truth, but also knowing what is not the truth. Right? So they're the first two chapters. The third chapter is Hita, is the means to attain liberation. And the fourth chapter of Vedanta Sutra is all about the goal. It's all about liberation. It's all about not attaining liberation. That's there in the third chapter, but actually, what is liberation? What constitutes liberation? One of the aspects or one of the attributes, one of the very important attributes is given right at the end. That once one achieves perfection, once achieves liberation, one never returns, right? Okay, so continuing on. So this is how Vedantic philosophy is grouped into subjects, Tattva, Hita, Purushartha, and then within those chapters of Vedanta Sutra, the different adhikaranas, the different subject matters, systematically bringing us to an understanding. Philosophy, which is mainly concerned with the nature of reality and the means of knowing it, deals with tattva. So that in a nutshell is what tattva means. Ethics and religion, which deal with the moral and spiritual practices required for attaining the goal, take care of Hita and Purushartha. I would say that the first part of that, the ethics and religion that deal with the moral and spiritual practices, is the Hita. The goal is the Purushartha. It means that Tattva, Hita, and Purushartha constitute the subject matter of both philosophy and religion. So basically Tattva, you're talking about philosophy. Hita and Purushartha have to do with religion. So it is well known, but all of them are treated in a philosophical way in the Vedanta Sutra. It is well known that while the first two adhyayas, he is going to say it, the first two adhyayas, the word adhyaya means chapters. The first two chapters of Vedanta Sutra discuss exclusively all issues connected with tattva. What is truth? What is not truth? First chapter, what is true? Second chapter, what is not true? The remaining two adhyayas, the remaining two chapters, elucidate the problems connected with Hita and Purushartha. Correct. Right. So this is just what I just said. Okay. So the expansion of the three categories into five is called Artha Panchika. We have studied Artha Panchika as a book by Pillai Lokacharya. Artha Panchika divides these things into five rather than into three. We're taking three and dividing it into and making it five. Right. So what are they? Those five things are, right? What is truth? What is not truth? Right. Those are two. Right. Then what is means? What is the means to liberation? What is not the means to liberation? Right. So that's four. And then what is liberation? Right. Five. But also, so Artha Panchika is what? What is reality? What is not reality? That's two things. Right? What is in the system of breaking it up into three, that's considered one, tattva. Hita is also divided into two. What we should do, how we should live, right? How we should practice that philosophy that we just understood in tattva, right? And what we shouldn't do, right? So we also have in our lives and in our religious, actions and everything like that, we have positive and negative aspects. We have what we call yama and niyamas. Yama means positive do's, and niyama means negative don'ts. Please worship the Supreme Lord, Sriman Narayana. Surrender to the Supreme Lord, Sriman Narayana. Don't depend upon any other so-called deities or so-called saviors. Be exclusively devoted to Sriman Narayana. Don't worship other gods, right? Like is stated in Bhagavad Gita. Devantaras, what is it called? Don't. I'm forgetting the Sanskrit, but anyway. Anyway, in the Gita it says, those who worship other gods go to those gods, and those who worship me come to me. And he says, Papadyantenya devata. That's it. There you go. It's on the tip of my tongue. Papadyantenya devata. Anya devata. Do not worship Anya devatas. Anya devatas means like Shiva and Ganesh and Shakti and Devi, whatever. But it can also mean our political leaders, our boss at work, our family, our friends, right? Anybody in this material world that we take shelter of, that we work for, don't take shelter of these fallible soldiers. These people cannot save you at the time of death, right? Even as Adi Shankaracharya said, Bhaja Govindam, Govindam, Bhajamudamate, Samprapte Sanihiti Kale, Nahi Rakshati, Rakshati, Duskrin Karate. He said, worship Govinda, worship Govinda, worship Govinda. Don't, anything else is not going to save you at the time of death, right? So this is the point. This is the point being made here. So we have to, this is a do and a don't, right? A do and a don't. Surrender to the Lord, Sri Govinda or Sriman Narayana, Lord Vishnu, right? Don't surrender to all these other things which we feel might be a help to us, right? We feel the president can help us, or the country can help us, or the family can help us, or our father can help us, our parents can help us, our friends can help us, our relatives can help us. We take shelter of them. These are in the Bhagavad Gita. These are called Anya Devatas. Don't go to other people other than Sriman Narayana for our succor, for our shelter, because he's the only shelter. Not only is he a shelter, he is the only shelter. Okay, so that's the point. So this is Artha Panchika, the five things, right? So three becomes five, right? The expansion of the three categories into five is called Artha Panchika, for which there is textual support in the Harita Samhita. So the Harita Samhita is a collection of works, is a book, which is a collection of Sanskrit, usually in verse form, right? Like that. It could be, when we talk about the agamas, the Pancharatra agamas, they're also called Samhitas. when we talk about the Vedas, there are parts of the Vedas which are also called Samhitas. They're big books, of verse like that. And so he's taken textual support from the which is what we call Shabda, or authoritative statement in the Harita Samhita, which proves that these three can be turned into 5 subjects. But even just logically, we've explained how Tattva-hita and Purushartha can be turned into the Artha Panchakam, the 5 different. Artha means 5 methods or 5 ways of proceeding, and Panchaka means 5. Right? Artha means ways of proceeding, Panchaka means 5. Okay, so 5 distinctions in knowledge. Okay, so according to the Harita Samhita has helped, so argues Dr. Chari, so we'll see he's making that argument, to add certain distinctive theological doctrines which are not stated explicitly in the Vedanta Sutra. Okay, so what SMS Chari is saying, although the Vedanta Sutra gives us some idea of Tattva-hita and Purushartha, there are other Vedic literatures which can also help us to understand. As long as they don't contradict the Vedas, other literatures are there to help us to understand the meaning of the Upanishads and the meaning of the Vedas. Right, so its philosophy is the same as that of Vedanta, and its religion is not basically different from the Vedanta, except that it has been further expanded to meet theological needs. So if we just read the Vedanta Sutras, we don't get the idea of what should I do. Okay, that's all I've understood philosophically the reality, but what should I actually do in life? SMS Chari's, Dr. Chari's book is comprehensive, covering the entire gamut of the philosophy and religion of Vaishnavism, after setting forth very elaborately the historical development of Vaishnavism in part 1. Dr. Chari devotes as many as 5 chapters to the discussion of the philosophy of Vaishnavism in part 2 of the book. It is necessary to mention in this connection that he has dealt with Bhakti Yoga. What is Bhakti Yoga? Bhakti Yoga, the word yoga comes from yuj, to join, right? The joining of what? The joining of the individual soul with the supreme soul in communion with God, right? Through bhakti or bhakti yoga. So the communion with God, of course, is considered liberation, and there are different types of liberation. We'll go into that later. But yoga means a process of communion, a process of getting to liberation. And we can there are different processes, and this process of bhakti yoga is a very popular one, right? Through devotion. There are other processes also spoken about in the Gita and the Upanishads, like karma yoga and jnana yoga, communing with God through work, communing through God through knowledge, and here it's talking about communing with God through devotion. Yes, so okay, so yeah, anybody who has to leave, that's fine. You can watch the video later. It is necessary to it is necessary to mention in this connection that he has dealt with bhakti yoga and moksha. We explained what moksha was, liberation, against the philosophical background of the Upanishads and the Vedanta Sutras in this part itself, after expounding the nature of Brahman, Chit and Achit. Okay, so there are 3 principal tattvas or entities that Vedanta talks about. The Vedanta philosophy talks about 3 entities, 3 eternal entities, and their relationship to each other. The first one is Brahman, which is also called Ishvara, meaning God. The second one is Chit, or the individual living being or soul, right? The individual conscious being, sentient being, or Chaitana or Chit. Chit means knowledge, by the way. It means directly knowledge. So the knower. I think, therefore I am. I am the knower, right? So the knower is the soul, right? And then Achit, those things which cannot know things, those things which are insentient or material universe, the material atoms and material nature, right? Insentient matter, or what we call jada. Jada means dull matter, right? So part 3 of the book consists of 8 chapters dealing with the theology of Vaishnavism. The analysis and explanation of the concept of Sheshatva. Sheshatva means servitorship or slaveship to the Supreme Lord, right? The concept of Sheshatva with all that it implies for the soul, right? So once we understand that we're a servant, then how should we serve, right? Because a servant's got to serve, otherwise not a servant, right? So if you tell somebody you're a servant, then the next question is, okay, what does that servant do? Right? A servant has to serve, otherwise he's not a servant. Right? A servant on his day off is not a servant. Right? He's not. He's on his day off. He said, I'm on my day. I'm on my free time. I'm not serving today. Right? But a person who's an eternal servant, a slave or an eternal servant, right? That person and the soul is considered an eternal servant of God, and therefore the soul has to know how to serve God if he understands that he's a. So the philosophical understanding of tattva is that we are servants of God or slaves of God or property of God. So then how should we act in that capacity? That's the point. So the analysis and explanation of the concept of sheshatva with all that it implies for the soul, which is seeking liberation from bondage, right? And of the doctrine of property, again, which means surrender or self-surrender to the Supreme Lord, which brings in for consideration the role of God on the one hand, and that of the jiva, meaning the individual chaitanya or chit or sentient being, on the other hand, in the context of divine grace, right? So all of these things and human effort is commendable, right? So all of these things we have to understand. We have to understand the part that God plays in our liberation, the part that we play in our liberation, the part that His grace, His mercy plays in our liberation, the part that our human effort plays in our liberation. All of those things will be explained in part 3. In part 4 of the book, Dr. Chari explains the Vaishnava way of life, in which the acharyas, sacraments, practice of daily religious rituals, and cultivation of ethical virtues find an integral place. I think that's pretty straightforward. So that's part 4. What preserves a religion is its universality, right? When a religion is not universal, then it tends to be forgotten. It tends to fall by the wayside, right? If it doesn't have a good philosophical basis, if it can't be practiced, right, properly or easily, right, and then if it doesn't universally, if it's only applicable to a few people, then it tends to fall by the wayside and becomes a philosophical backwater, in history. So there are many religious sects like this, right? That okay, one time there was a few people who believed this, but they don't. It's not practiced anymore because it was just totally not universal. It was not applicable to all people and didn't make a lot of sense and was too exclusive, and it just felt didn't endure. So the philosophical base of Vaishnavism, as Dr. Chari points out, leads to the practice of Vaishnava Dharma. Vaishnava Dharma means the religious practice of Vaishnavas, of those who worship Lord Vishnu, the Supreme, which guarantees peace with others through peace with oneself, right? So that's a great aspect of Vaishnavism, is it's not a warlike religion. It's also not a proselytizing religion in the sense that we need to make other people followers of Vaishnavism. We're content within ourselves and we're at peace. We're at peace within ourselves, and therefore we're at peace with others also. Because we understand that, like the Bhagavad Gita says, everyone follows Lord Krishna's. Krishna says, everyone follows my path in all respects. So if somebody cannot understand Vaishnavism, we don't deride them. They haven't come to that realization. They haven't come to a deeper realization yet. Maybe they'll never in this lifetime come to that realization. And that's whatever aspect of the truth they're able to grasp is fine. We believe that that we have covered all the aspects in full, and therefore we have a siddhanta. But we don't deride other people for not having the siddhanta, for only having a part of the truth. That's fine. That's absolutely fine with us. And people are, because all knowledge will come from the Supreme Lord anyway. In our estimation, ultimately it has to come from Him. So Vishnu, the all-pervading principle, right? Because the word Vishnu in Sanskrit means all-pervading, right? Now, there's different ways He can pervade. He, in fact, pervades from inside everything and also from outside everything. So He is not only the whole, the universe, right? He is not only the whole, and we are parts of the whole, but He is also a part of us in the sense that He accompanies the individual soul as the super soul of the Paramatman with the Atman. within the heart of every living being. So he is also there within every atom. He is also pervading personally throughout the cosmos. So pervading chit and achit, pervading the sentient beings and also the insentient beings. So from the inside and from the outside. Okay, so Vishnu covers all of that. That he is all pervading principle, which is none other than Brahman. So when you talk to Advaitins, when you talk to people in other schools, they'll talk about the great one, the great one. Brahman means in Sanskrit the great one. Brahma means the great one. It doesn't refer to the four-headed deity who is supposed to be the original creator of this world or whatever, in the Puranas. That is called Chaturmukha Brahma. That is different, right? Here we use the word Brahman. Brahman is spoken about in the Upanishads, and is spoken about is the supreme, the great one. The word Brahma means the great one, like that, without giving him a specific name, because different schools of religion will give different names to him. Somebody will call him Allah, and somebody will call him Jehovah, and somebody will call him, Shiva, and somebody will call him Krishna, and somebody will call him, somebody will call him whatever. There'll be different names. Someone will say God, somebody will say, like this. So, okay, so these are different names like that, but it means the one supreme, the supreme person, like that, right? So Brahman. So Vishnu is equated with Brahman, like that, and we'll get into the details of why we accept that and why we reject other persons being equated with the supreme Brahman or Ishvara, the controller of everything, right? We'll get into that as we get into the book. It includes every being and indwells in every being. He includes within himself every being, right? He is the body of everything. And also he indwells within every being, right? So one who is aware of this truth will realize, since Vishnu is in all beings, all being divine are equal, and that to love every being is to love Vishnu, right? So we cannot hate others. We cannot hate others. This is what he's talking about, being at peace with yourself and at peace with everybody. We cannot hate others because others are also pervaded by Vishnu from within and without. We can hate when others misuse their power of action, which is given to them by the Lord. We can hate that. We can. Christians have this idea also: hate the sinner, not the sinner, right? So it's not that we have to accept everything. We can't say, "Oh, we love Hitler because he killed so many people." But no, we can understand when people work against God, when they're not serving God, when they're not in their constitutional eternal position, when they're not following. But at the same time, we have to understand that everyone actually follows his plan. He has a greater plan. Maybe we don't understand it, but in a sense, we have to love everybody because we also love the Supreme, and the Supreme is there within everybody. We are also within the Supreme. So we can love ourselves, we can love the Supreme, we can love everybody because it's all, Vishnu is pervading everything. So in one sense, we can do that. We can love it. So one who orders one's life on the basis of this awareness will practice the ideals of love and equality. Such a person is called a Vaishnava. So here he's giving an initial, this Mr. R. Balsubramaniam, who's a chairman of the Indian Council of Philosophical Research, who just wrote this forward. He's also a scholar, and he's saying, in a sense, this is a definition of a Vaishnava. A Vaishnava is a person who practices the ideals of love and equality for all living beings, right? And this idea is also given in the Upanishads, right? So we should not. This leads to the universality of Vaishnavism, right? So S.M.S. Charya's book is not only comprehensive, but also analytical. The explanation of concepts and the formulation of arguments in support of the concepts are analytical. Also, they have been supported by textual authority, right, wherever necessary. So he's going to give us quotes from all the different shastras to back up what he's saying. This is a book that every Hindu, not only Hindu, I would say anybody can read, should read for appreciating the philosophy and religious heritage which she has inherited, right? So he's talking about Hindus reading it because it's part of their heritage. Okay, I think everybody should read it because it's the truth. It's a full exposition of the truth that is given in the Vedas. This is a book that which every scholar, particularly interested in Indian philosophy in general and Vaishnavism in particular, should read. Right. So I agree. It's a very basic book on Vaishnavism and Indian philosophy in general. Right. Okay. So let's continue on. The preface, that was the forward. This book is in response to the long-felt need for a comprehensive treatise on the fundamental philosophical and theological doctrines of Vaishnavism, which is one of the oldest living monotheistic religions in India. And I have to, of course, put monotheism in a quotation there, because if we go more deeply into the philosophy, it is more than monotheism. It is monotheism on steroids. It is what is called panentheism. It is all in God, God in all, right? Which is not, strictly speaking, monotheism doesn't give us that idea. It just gives us the idea that God is separate from us. Yes, he's separate from us, but he's also related to us intimately, being our indweller and also us indwelling in him, like that. So this is called panentheism. Panentheism means, pan means everything, all, and en means in. Theos means God. So panentheism means all in God, God in all. All in God, God in all. That's what panentheism means. So that is the meaning of actually Vaishnavism. And most of the, to a lesser greater degree, most of the philosophies of the Vedantic philosophies of Vaishnava schools agree on that. So this book is a response, a long-felt need of comprehensive treatise on the fundamental philosophical and theological doctrines of Vaishnavism, which is one of the oldest living monotheistic religions of India. During the last few decades, books have been published on Ramanuja's philosophy and religion, but these do not cover exhaustively all the aspects of Vaishnava religion. So like P.N. Srinivasacharya's book. So even the few books written in English on Vaishnavism do not deal in detail with all the basic doctrines of Vaishnava theology. Further, while presenting Ramanuja's thoughts, a clear-cut distinction has also to be made between philosophy and religion, and the two are often mixed up. The Vishishtadvaita Vedanta expounded by Ramanuja is essentially a philosophical system developed on the teachings contained in the Upanishads, the Vedanta Sutras, and the Bhagavad Gita. These are called the Prasthana Traya. The three, Traya means three, the three Prasthanas, the three basic axiomatic texts. The three basic axiomatic texts of Vedanta are the Upanishads themselves, which are the literal Vedanta, the end parts of the Vedas, or the end part of knowledge, right? The Vedanta Sutra, which systematizes those quotations from the Upanishads into different subjects and chapters, and the Bhagavad Gita, which comes as a philosophical discussion as part of one of the epics, the Mahabharata, which is a great long epic, which is a discussion between Lord Krishna and Arjuna on the philosophy of Vedanta. So these are the three basic scriptures, basic texts, which give our axiomatic truths of Vedanta. It also has a distinctive theology based on Vedanta, as in the case also with Shankara's Advaita. Though philosophy and religion are not separable in the Indian schools of thought, it should still be possible to make a distinction between a philosophical system, darshan, right, the way we see the world, right, and what is a religious system, a mata, the way we think about the world, or the way we think that we should act, right? So in my opinion, the Vishishtadvaita philosophy as presented by Ramanuja is distinct from the Vishishtadvaita religion known more popularly as Vaishnavism. So Ramanuja's philosophy of Vishishtadvaita, his philosophy of Vishishtadvaita, is also slightly different although inseparable from Sri Vaishnavism, right? The Vedantic philosophy of Ramanuja. You can be a Sri Vaishnava and not study Vedanta. That's also true, right? But the basis of your actions and the basis of your life is based on Vedantic principles. So, although the two are complementary, representing two facets of the same system of thought, above he gave the analogy of two sides of the same coin. This fact has been ably established by Vedanta Deshika. Vedanta Deshika came about in the 14th century, right? So about 200 years after Ramanuja, and I think 1369, like that. And so then he was also a great person. He wrote about 120 books on all different topics and different styles. He was a great scholar. This fact was ably established by Vedanta Deshika, an illustrious follower of Ramanuja, in his Tattva Mukta Kalapa, which we are now studying with Dr. Alwar. So any Wednesdays, if you want to check out his English class on that, we just finished one before starting this particular class on Tattva Mukta Kalapa, which means the Tattva Mukta Kalapa translated means the pearl necklace of philosophical truths. And my other book, Fundamentals of Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, published recently. So SMS Chari has written two books, which are summaries of two other books by Vedanta Deshika, which describe also the fundamentals of Vishishtadvaita, but not in such a comprehensive way as this book, which also includes the religious aspects, the theological aspects. I have therefore endeavored in this volume to present the religion of Vishishtadvaita under the title of Vaishnavism as distinct from its philosophy. The theological doctrines, so this won't be as heavy as those books philosophically. This will be a lighter treatment. It'll be easier to understand. The theological doctrines, each one of which consists a distinctive feature of this religion, have been delineated from the philosophical theories and discussed separately in detail. Right. So far as I'm aware, this is the first time that such an attempt has been made to present in English in a single volume a comprehensive account of the philosophy, theology, and religious discipline of Vaishnavism. In writing this book, I have taken material mostly from the original source books, right? During the period extending from the 10th to the 15th century, eminent Vaishnavacharyas or teachers have contributed erudite, and here's where the scan of the preface stops, and we've got two more pages of the preface, which I'm now going to read from the hard copy that I have here. Right. So just to start that sentence again, from the period extending from the 10th to the 15th century, from the 900s to the 1400s, eminent Vaishnava acharyas or teachers have contributed erudite works both in Sanskrit and Manipravala language, Sanskritized Tamil prose, right? So it's Tamil, basically, with Sanskrit words in it, Sanskrit nouns, Sanskrit words with Tamil endings, so that Tamil-speaking people can understand it, but the words are Sanskrit, and therefore the words were understood by the Sri Vaishnava community, just as we understand the word guru, karma, pandit, yoga today in English, karma. We have an understanding of these Sanskrit words in the English language now because they've come into English. Similarly, in those days, in the Sri Vaishnava community, in the medieval Sri Vaishnava community, they understood many more terms, Sanskrit terms, and therefore the books could be written using those terms, those Sanskrit terms, but giving the grammar of Tamil so that people could read them. That is called Manipravala. The word Manipravala actually means pearls and coral. So if you have a necklace made of pearl, coral, it looks very nice, white and red, like that. So some women, they wear this, necklace like that, and it's considered to be very beautiful because it's not just pearls, it's not just coral, but it's pearl, coral. It looks very nice. So Manipravala is considered to be a cross hybrid between Sanskrit and Tamil, which is a medieval language which was used by some of the Vaishnavacharyas between the 10th and the 15th century. So, okay, Manipravala on Vaishnavism, on authority of the Vedas, Upanishads, Agamas, meaning the Vaishnava Agamas, we're talking about here. The Vaishnava Agamas, there are two Agamas. Agamas are texts which tell us how to worship Vishnu, basically. So they come in two flavors, the Pancharatra and the Vaikhanasa. The Pancharatra is open for everybody to participate in. The Vaikhanasa is mainly for priests of temples that come in a particular lineage from the sage Vaikhanasa, right? So it's limited to priests, temple priests of that lineage, like that. You can still go to that temple, as you can see, the Tirupati Balaji that I talked about, Venkateshwara, before, who lives in Tirupati. That temple is a Vaikhanasa temple. So The ceremonies are performed by all priests that are descended from the sage Vaikanasa. It's Vaikanasic temple. Whereas in Sri Rangam, if you go to Sri Rangam temple, the temple priests are Pancharatra priests. They follow the Pancharatra Agama. The others follow the Vaikanasa Agama. So this is when we say Agamas, we mean the Vaishnava Agamas. There are other Agamas. There are Shaiva, Shaktan, and some other Agamas also. But we are specifically talking about here with the Vaishnava Agamas, the epics, meaning Mahabharata and the Ramayana, the story of Rama and the story of the Krishna and the Pandavas, the 5 Pandava brothers. Selected Puranas, right? Meaning not all the Puranas, because there are 18 great Puranas or Mahapuranas, and there are some other minor Puranas, but out of the 18 great ones, there are only 6 of them which are considered to be sattvic or in the mode of goodness, and which pertain to Vaishnavism. And therefore, although there might be some other stories in some of the other Puranas which we can also accept, we don't accept all the Puranas because some of the Puranas are written for people who worship other deities like Brahma or Shiva or Devi, like that, and they give the wrong impression sometimes to people that these other deities are the supreme God or the supreme controller. But that's because those people are in a different mode of nature. Those people follow a particular path, and we don't accept the quotations from those scriptures as being as important as the ones from the 6 sattvic Puranas or Puranas in the mode of goodness, and certainly not as important as direct quotations from the Shastra, from the Vedic scriptures, from the Vedas. So selected Puranas and hymns of the Alwars. The Alwars were great saints. There were 12 of them. Some people say there were 10, but because there was one who was a woman who was not, who was considered to be an incarnation of a goddess of the earth, and there was another called Andal, and there was another one, Madhura Kavi, who was a disciple of one of these saints and who didn't actually praise God himself personally, but praised his guru only. So that was called Madhura Kavi Alwa. So if we take out those 2, we get 10. So 10 or 12. Some people say 10 or 12 Alwas. They're great saints in South India, Vaishnav saints, and they composed in Tamil poetry, 4,000 poetic verses, which are called the Nalayira Divya Prabandha. They are called the Prabandhas, which means the type of Tamil verse that they are. And they are called Divya, which means that their poetry is considered divine because it also mirrors the same philosophy as the Vedanta, as the Upanishads, through their mystic experience of God, right? These are people who actually intuited God and people who lived holy lives, and they were great saints and had so many realizations which are equivalent to the realizations of the Vedic rishis who gave us who were the seers of the Vedic mantras, right? So, and it's called Nalayira. The word Nalayira in Tamil simply means, Nala means 4, right? And Ayira means 1,000. So Nalayira means the 4,000 divine verses in Tamil, which are considered to be equivalent for the Sri Vaishnavas to the Vedas. So sometimes we say the Vedas are the greatest scriptures like that. The Sri Vaishnavas also count as great scriptures, equivalent to the Vedas, these philosophical treatises by the Alwars, the great saints, right? So these are called Nalaya Vipanda. That's why Sri Vaishnavas are sometimes called Ubaya Vedantins. So we are Vedantins. We follow the Vedanta of the Upanishads, but we also follow the Vedantic principles which are coming from these Tamil hymns of the Alwars. So therefore, we follow 2 Vedantas. Therefore, the word Ubaya in Sanskrit, if you studied Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna says to Krishna, Senayo Ubayo Madhye. He says, Madhye in the middle, Ubayo of both sides, right? So Ubaya means both sides. So Ubaya Vedanta means both types of Vedanta, the Tamil Vedanta and the Sanskrit Vedanta. The Sanskrit Vedanta of the Upanishads and the Tamil Vedanta of the Nalaya Divya Prabandham, the 4,000 Tamil verses of the Alwars. So Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, or Sri Vaishnavism in particular, the religion of Sri Vaishnavism, is made up of these different aspects. It's made up of the philosophical aspect of the Vedanta, based on the Prasthana Traya, the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, and the Vedanta Sutras. Right? We can also add to that a fourth Prasthana called the Vishnu Sahasranama, the 1,000 names of Vishnu, which also enters in there and also has a great deep philosophical understanding. All of the acharyas of all the different schools of Vedanta have written commentaries on these 4 texts. Yes, Shankaracharya has written a commentary on Vishnu Sahasranam, on Bhagavad Gita, on the Upanishads, and on Vedanta Sutras. So has Ramanuja, so has Madhva, so has Vallabha, so has Chaitanya, so has all these schools have their commentaries on these 4 basic texts like that. So when we call them Prasthana Trayi, there's really 4. Okay, there's really also the Vishnu Sahasranams added in there, right? So that is what. So the philosophy and the theology, philosophy of Vishishtadvaita and Sri Vaishnavism, the school of Ramanuja, is based upon, number one, that the Prasthana Trayi, the philosophy of Vedanta as is described in those 3 or 4 texts, basic texts, the philosophical outpourings and emotional philosophical outpourings of the Alwars in the 4,000 divine hymns in Tamil, and also the actual practical method of worshipping Vishnu, which is given to us in the Agama Shastras, the Pancharatra Agamas specifically, and to a lesser extent the Vaikhanasa Agamas, because they're lesser known and lesser practiced in India. Okay, so the material available in these treatises is very extensive. Without going into all the details contained therein, I have selected the essential teachings having philosophical and theological significance. My objective has been limited to presenting an authentic account of the philosophy and theology of Vaishnavism in a coherent manner. For the same reason, I have refrained from making a comparative study of this religion with other monotheistic religions. Now, if you want a comparative, he's also written another book, which is called Indian Philosophical Systems, where he juxtaposes, he compares other philosophical systems with Sri Vaishnavism. So here we're just going to talk about Vaishnavism like that. Wherever I was confronted with doctrinal differences among the Vaishnava sects and other parallel cults, I have tried to maintain a non-partisan attitude and discuss the doctrines purely from a philosophical standpoint. Okay, so what he's saying here is, although he is a Sri Vaishnava and he's written this book about Sri Vaishnavism, it's really about Vaishnavism in general, and therefore he's going to try and present in an objective way, in an objective philosophical way, all the different sects of Vaishnavism that is there, like that. So for these reasons, for reasons explained in the introduction, I have preferred to adopt the term Vaishnavism rather than instead of Sri Vaishnavism, right? As it generally is used by other scholars who have written on Ramanuja's religion. In my opinion, it is not a regional cult confined to a limited area, though it was founded by Ramanuja, born in South India. Its relevance and sweep is far, far wider, and the ethical values embedded in this system have universal appeal. In the post-Ramanuja period, right, after 1137 CE, several Vaishnava movements represented by eminent religious reformers such as Madhva, Nimbarka, right, Ramananda, Vallabha, Chaitanya, and Ganeshwara have come up in other parts of India. All these are offshoots of the basic Vaishnavism, which was prevalent from Vedic times and systematized later by Ramanuja. I have therefore restricted the scope of my book to the original Vaishnavism as developed by him, in other words, Ramanuja, and his followers. In a work of this type, the use of technical terms in Sanskrit is unavoidable. I have, however, tried to minimize their use. Wherever I've mentioned Sanskrit words and the quotations in the body of the text, I have given their nearest English equivalent. Wherever English terms are used, their Sanskrit equivalent is also given and indicated to indicate their correct import. Except the commonly used words, all the Sanskrit words have been diacritically marked. The long compound Sanskrit words have been split up wherever necessary to facilitate easy reading. I have avoided as far as possible the use of Tamil quotations from the hymns of the Alwars and the literature in Manipurvala language, as these would be difficult to read and understand by a person not conversant with that language. Right, I have taken special pains to express highly technical concepts in a simple and lucid manner as lucid manner as possible to facilitate easy comprehension. I hope this publication will be found useful by students of comparative religion in general, and in particular by those who wish to have an in-depth study of this important religion. In the preparation of this book, I am guided primarily by the knowledge of the essentials of Vaishnavism imparted to me 50 years ago by my spiritual preceptor, the late Sri Gosti Puram, Soumya Narayanacharya Swami, 1878 to 1943, under whom I had the good fortune to study the Rahasyatraya Saram, which is the magnum opus, is a great book on the esoteric meaning of the three mantras, right? The three rahasyas, Traya means three, Sara means the essence, Rahasya means secrets, of Vedanta Deshika, right? Which is the basic source book for Vaishnavism. As a token of my gratitude, I respectfully dedicate this work to my Acharya. He was an illustrious example of an ideal Sri Vaishnava in the present century. I am also indebted to another Acharya, the late Sri Madhurandakam Veera Raghavacharya Swami, 1900 to 1983, under whom I studied Sri Bhashya, the commentary on Vedanta Sutra by Ramanuja, and Bhagavad Vishayam, the commentary on Nam Alwars, who was one of the leader of the Alwars, Tiruvai Moli, which is out of the 4,000. He wrote more than 1,000. So 1,120 verses in poetry, in Tamil poetry of the 4,000 were written by Nam Alwar and are called the Tiruvai Moli in Tamil. It's a very, very important, and it's considered equal to the Samaveda by Sri Vaishnavas, which are also important source books for Vaishnavism. So he studied also the Bhagavad Vishayam, which is the explanation of that part of the Alwar's works. In preparation of this book, I have consulted those few traditional Sri Vaishnava scholars who are available today in South India. There are very few really good scholars of Sri Vaishnavism even today. I take this opportunity to express my grateful thanks to all of them. I have received considerable help from Dr. V. Vardachari. We are studying his other book. V. Vardachari wrote of the French Indological Institute in Pondicherry, who we're also studying Agamas and Sri Vaishnava and South Indian Vaishnavism from V. Vardacharya. So if people want to look for that on the YouTube channel, there's also a separate set of playlist for that. So I received considerable help from Dr. V. Vardacharya, who was good enough to go through the major part of the transcript of this book and make valuable suggestions. I express my sincere thanks to him. I should also thank Dr. N.S. Anantachar. Dr. N.S. Anantachar. N.S. Anantachar is another Sri Vaishnava scholar, and we have several books in English by him, right? Professor K.T. Pandarangi. Professor K.T. Pandarangi, also known to me very well, is a Madhva scholar who has also written many books on Madhva Vaishnavism or Dvaita Vedanta in English. And Dr. L.V. Rajagopal, who have seen some of the draft papers and offered useful comments. So he's taken this book and shown it to people from other traditions also of Vaishnavism, and he's got their opinions and their help on the particular parts which are not about Sri Vaishnavism, but about Madhva Vaishnavism and other forms of Vaishnavism. So my special thanks are due to my esteemed friend, Dr. S. Srinivasachar, who patiently read the entire manuscript and made useful corrections. My thanks are also due to all those who have helped me in one way or another in completing this book. I should also express my grateful thanks to esteemed Professor R. Balsubramaniam, who we just read the preface or the foreword. The foreword of this book was written by him, right? For evincing keen interest in my work and for graciously writing the foreword, and that is signed by S.M. Srinivasacharya in Bangalore, June 9th, 1993. Okay, so that's the preface. And now we come to, I just want to show, let's just have a quick look at the table of contents and then we'll end this session here. And next time we'll go into the actual contents of the book. It's very important to have a background in the book. Here's the content. So we've already been through the foreword, the preface. The scheme for transliteration is similar to all other ones. List of abbreviations. We don't need to go through those. You can go through those yourself in the introduction we've been through. Okay, so now part one is as he said, the historical development of Vaishnavism. And there's so many sections there. Part two is about the philosophy of Vaishnavism, right? Part three, and that's going to deal with the doctrine of the ultimate reality, the doctrine of the individual self, and the doctrine of cosmic matter. Also the doctrine of bhakti yoga and the doctrine of moksha, right? So then we're going to go to part three. Part three is the theology based on the philosophy that we just understood. the theology of Vaishnavism, which was going to explain things like why we accept Vishnu as the supreme being, etc., all these different things. Vishnu and the goddess Shri, Vishnu and his attributes, Vishnu and his incarnations, Vishnu and Nitya Vibhuti, which is the spiritual world, right? Vishnu and the Jiva, what's the relationship between the individual soul and Vishnu and Supreme Soul Ishvara, right? Jiva as Vishnu Dasa property will also be covered here. The means of attainment of Vishnu or attainment of moksha in different sections here. The Vishnu as a supreme goal of life, right? So this is all in part 3, right? Where theology starts to meet philosophy there. In part 4, we get even more of understanding of the religious discipline, right? The practical aspects of the theology, which we just understood in the previous part, which is based on the philosophy, which is in the previous 2 parts, right? So then we have the religious discipline of Vaishnavism, and that will bring us, and then we'll talk about, in that, he'll also talk about different other sects of Vaishnavism, etc., and we'll come to the conclusion finally.
Om Namo Narayanaya. Om Namo Narayanaya.